They didn't believe me until the machine started screaming and we pulled a concrete marker out of the ground right beside the Homeowners Association clubhouse. 1 second the room was full of smug smiles and folding chairs. The next, the HOA president's face went paper white because the proof was literally in the dirt. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a land grab that had been going on right under my nose. I'm Ethan Walker, and I'm not some rich guy with a legal department on speed dial. I'm a working man, tools in my truck, calluses on my hands, bills that don't care about community guidelines. The property I owned wasn't fancy either. It was an old cabin on family land, 47 acres, my grandfather bought back in the 1940s, the kind of place with a tin roof, a creaky porch, and memories baked into the wood. I hadn't been out there in a while. Work was busy, life was loud, and the cabin was quiet. So I figured it would still be there whenever I got back. That was my mistake, because the day I finally drove out there, I hit a curve in the road and I almost slammed the brakes through the floor. There were houses, not one or two. I mean rows of them, perfect driveways, fresh sod, cute little mailboxes lined up like soldiers. It looked like a whole suburb had been dropped out of the sky onto my land. I kept driving slower and slower, trying to process what I was seeing. And then I saw a big stone sign with shiny letters, Heritage Ridge, like it had been there forever. I pulled up near what used to be my old trail and stepped out, and the air smelled like fertilizer and new paint instead of pine and dust. Kids were riding bikes where I used to hunt squirrels with my grandpa. Some guy waved at me like I was the one passing through his neighborhood. And then right on cue, an SUV rolled up like it owned the place. White, spotless tinted windows. The kind of car that never sees a muddy road. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Madison Price. Blonde, sharp smile, clipboard in her hands like it was a weapon. She didn't even say hello. She looked me up and down and went, "Sir, you can't be here. This is a private community." I actually laughed just once because my brain couldn't find any other response. "I can't be here," I said. "That cabin back there is mine." Madison's smile tightened like a zip tie. "That structure is not in compliance," she said, flipping a page like she'd rehearsed it. "And you are currently trespassing on Homeowners Association property." Homeowners Association. The words came out of her mouth like a final verdict. Then she slid a packet toward me, violations, fines, and a little cherry on top. A bill for monthly HOA fees. As if I'd been a member this whole time. And right there in bold was the deadline. 30 days. Pay, comply, or they take action. I had my grandfather's deed in my truck folded in an envelope with other old papers. I could have waved it right in her face and turned this into a shouting match in the street. But something about Madison's confidence bothered me. Not confidence like she believed she was right. Confidence like she believed she was protected. So I didn't show her anything. I just stared at the packet and said, "I'll look into it." Madison leaned in like she could smell weakness. "You should," she said, "because we're very strict here. This community won't tolerate disruptions." Then she walked away like she'd just put me in my place. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I didn't like at all. That slow, crawling realization that someone might have built a whole system around stealing from me. Paperwork gates rules everything, so I'd look crazy if I tried to fight it. The next few weeks were death by 1,000 cuts. Letters in my mailbox. Notice of violation. Then another. And another. One day it was the cabin. The next day it was unauthorized vehicle. Then it was unregistered structure. Like they were inventing rules just to keep me reacting instead of thinking. I called the county. I got transferred 12 times, left messages, waited on hold until my phone got hot. The HOA sent a compliance officer to take photos like I was a criminal. And Madison, she'd pop up every time like a bad commercial. Same clipboard, same smile, same fake concern. "Oh, Ethan," she'd say, "we're just trying to keep property values high." Meanwhile, I was losing real money. I missed work days to meet inspectors. I lost a client because I couldn't show up on time. And every fine felt like a mosquito bite you can't ignore. Small enough to be insulting, constant enough to drive you insane. I'm going to be honest. There was a night I sat at my kitchen table with that packet spread out, and my hands were shaking. Not because I felt guilty, but because the math wasn't looking good. They had lawyers. They had a board. They had community funds. I had a pickup truck, a deed older than most of their residents, and a bank account that didn't enjoy surprises. I remember staring at the ceiling and thinking, if this drags out, they'll bleed me dry before I ever get in front of the right person. And that's the moment I almost did something stupid. I almost called Madison to talk it out. I almost asked for a compromise. Almost. Then the next morning happened. I drove out to the cabin early and I heard a chainsaw before I even parked. A full-on chainsaw tearing through wood like it was angry. I ran toward the sound and saw a crew in bright vests cutting down a huge old oak near the edge of the property, one of the oldest trees out there. Not some skinny sapling. This tree was a landmark. My grandfather used to point at it and say, "That's how you know where you are." I yelled, "Hey, stop! What the hell are you doing?" A guy in a hard hat didn't even flinch. "Work order!" he shouted over the engine. "Tree's a hazard." "That's my tree," I said, stepping closer. "You're on my land." He just pointed toward the street like that explained everything. HOA approved it. The chainsaw bit deeper. Wood chips flew like confetti at a funeral. And something snapped in me, not a dramatic movie snap. A real one. The kind where you stop hoping people will do the right thing and you start preparing to prove what they did. That afternoon, Madison showed up at the cabin like she was visiting a patient. She walked inside without waiting for an invitation, wrinkled her nose at the old wood smell, and set a bottle of wine on my table like we were friends. "Ethan," she said softly, "I hate that things got tense." I didn't touch the wine. She slid a document across the table, clean, simple, just a few lines. A quitclaim. A fancy way of saying, "Sign this and you'll never bother us again." Then she offered me $150,000 like it was generous. "Take it," she said. "You'll walk away with cash, no stress, no court. Everybody wins." I stared at her for a long second, and I realized exactly what was going on. They didn't want peace. They wanted me to fold, because if I folded, everything they built stayed safe. And if I didn't, then they had to face the one thing they couldn't threaten into disappearing: a recorded deed. A real boundary, a marker in the ground. I didn't argue with Madison. I didn't throw her out. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said no. Madison's eyes narrowed like she'd never heard that word in her life. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice sharpening. Then she leaned in close and added, "You're one person. This is a community." I watched her leave and my stomach sank, because I knew what was coming next. But I also knew what I had to do. I called Caleb James. Caleb wasn't some flashy attorney. He was a retired county survey tech, gray hair, sunburned neck, the kind of guy who still says sir and ma'am without irony. He'd known my grandfather. When I told him what I saw, he didn't gasp, he didn't rant. He just went quiet for a second. Then he said, "Meet me out there tomorrow. Bring coffee, and bring every paper you've got." The next day, Caleb showed up with a GPS unit, a metal detector, and a shovel that looked like it had seen wars. We walked the edges of the development, and he kept muttering numbers under his breath like a prayer. Then he stopped, pointed toward the HOA clubhouse, big building, pretty landscaping, little fountain out front. "That right there," he said, "is sitting way too far over." He swept the metal detector near the fountain. Nothing. He moved 2 feet. Nothing. He moved again. Beep. Loud, sharp, certain. Caleb looked at me and said, "That's not a sprinkler." He dug. Just a little. Then more. And the sound of the shovel hitting something solid made my heart jump into my throat. Concrete. He brushed dirt away with his hand like he was revealing treasure. And there it was. An old boundary monument, weathered, stamped real. The kind of thing you don't accidentally ignore when you build a neighborhood. And that's when I stopped feeling outnumbered. Because now it wasn't Ethan versus the HOA. It was Ethan, plus the truth. Word spreads fast in a planned community. A woman named Rose Bennett, retired accountant, reached out after she heard rumors. She didn't care about my cabin, she cared about the HOA's books, and she said the legal fees line item had been exploding for months. Miguel Torres, a contractor who'd worked some of the builds, quietly sent me photos, permits, lot lines, little inconsistencies that made his skin crawl. Nothing dramatic, just enough to show a pattern. Then the HOA announced their annual meeting at the clubhouse, and Madison made it sound like she was going to address the Ethan problem. So I showed up, not alone. The room was packed, residents sipping bottled water, board members smiling too hard, Madison at the front with a microphone like she was running for office. She launched into her speech about community integrity, and then she pointed right at me. "There he is," she said, voice rising. "The trespasser, the disruptor." A few people turned to look like I was the villain in their little postcard life. Madison smiled and said, "Sir, you are not a member of this homeowners association. You need to leave." I stood up slowly. I didn't shout. I didn't insult her. I just said, "Before I go, I'd like to show everyone something." Madison's smile twitched. Caleb stepped forward with the GPS. Rose sat in the second row, holding a folder so thick it looked like it had its own gravity. Miguel stood near the back, arms crossed, watching. And I said, Madison keeps calling me a trespasser. But she never explains why my grandfather's land suddenly became community property. Madison lifted her chin. That's because it's settled, she snapped. Our documents. Caleb cut in, calm as a man measuring a fence. Your documents are wrong, he said. The room made that little nervous murmur sound like people do when they smell trouble but don't want to admit it. Caleb walked right outside to the fountain in full view of everyone through the glass doors. Madison followed, furious, still trying to perform control. What are you doing? She hissed. Caleb swept the metal detector across the ground. Silence. Another sweep. Silence. Then, beep. Every head turned. Phones came up. Madison's face tightened, and for the first time she looked less like a queen and more like someone watching the floor crack under her heels. Caleb knelt and started digging. Madison barked, Stop, you can't. But she didn't touch him, because touching him would mean admitting she was scared of what he'd find. Dirt came up, then more. Then the shovel hit concrete again and Caleb brushed it clean like he was unveiling a headstone. There it was. The old monument dated decades before Heritage Ridge ever existed. Rose stepped forward and said loud enough for everyone, So, if the clubhouse is on his property, where exactly have all our fees been going? Madison opened her mouth, but nothing intelligent came out. Just a stammer, a weak denial, a desperate little laugh that fooled nobody. And right then, a county deputy who'd been called for a disturbance walked up, took one look at the marker, the GPS screen, the crowd filming, and then looked straight at Madison. Ma'am, he said, if this is his land, who's trespassing? Madison didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was sitting in the open like a loaded weight, and the entire neighborhood was watching her finally run out of script. Lesson paper and power mean nothing when the ground itself tells the truth.